everybody, Trevor here. Since the Shine Time Station franchise has hit its 35th anniversary, I thought I'd do a top 10 favorite episodes from that show. While I hardly watched Shine Time Station for the most part as a kid, but thankfully, I have seen a few episodes airing on the Fox Family Channel back in 1999. It was an overall great way to bring Thomas and Friends to America. And the reason why it was made in the first place was because the people there at the time wanted something that's half an hour rather than just airing a 4.5 minute Thomas episode. Not to mention that they made some changes from the original UK dub by changing some terms such as freight cars instead of trucks, and saying Sir Topham Hatt instead of his nickname the Fat Controller, since the word fat is considered offensive in America, which I can quite understand. But enough about the show's history. Let's bring up one rule when it comes to this list. I will only include episodes from seasons 1 to 3, so that means no family specials nor spin off episodes. Now, without further ado, let's grab some gold dust and dive into these 10 magical episodes of Shine Time Station. Number 10, A Place Unlike Any Other. This is the very first episode of the series, and it was an overall great way of introducing some of the main characters like Stacy Jones and Mr. Conductor, who was portrayed by Ringo Starr at the time. This also airs the very first two episodes of Thomas and Friends known as Thomas Gets Tricked, aka Thomas and Gordon in the UK, and Edward Helps Out, aka Edward and Gordon in the UK. These are two of the reasons why this is number 10. The third reason is that while Ringo Starr does a good job as Mr. Conductor, but in terms of different impressions for each character, George Carlin was an improvement over him. No offense. Oh, and did you know that this is the only season to feature the character Harry Cupper before he made his final return in one of the family specials? Yeah, I kind of wished he appeared more often in the show since he's quite underrated in my opinion. Number 9. How the Station Got Its Name. This is the final episode of season 3 of Shine Time Station, and it's about Becky, Kara, and Mr. Conductor traveling back in time to see how Shine Time Station got its name. And there, they met the ancestors of Stacy, Schemer, Billy, Mr. King, and many other characters. I love this episode because of these reasons alone. But unfortunately, as I've said, this was the last episode of the entire show, if you don't count the family specials and spin-off episodes, that is. My favorite moment would have to be the climax where Gracie Jones stops a runaway train with a warning lamp, which happened off screen. And because of her heroic duties, the station itself was named Shine Time Station, which does make perfect sense, hence the title of the show. I also enjoyed the part where Mr. Conductor basically tells an artist to draw a signal house in the station mural by his magic. So, all in all, despite being the final episode of the show, it was a perfect way to end season 3 because of these reasons alone. I suggest you give this one a watch if you haven't yet. Number 8, Sweet and Sour. This is one of my favorite episodes from season 2. It's about Dan, Becky, and Kara running a lemonade stand when Schemer intervenes and promotes them to be in a partnership with him. This is also the first time we're introduced to his little nephew Schemy, who is as troublesome as his uncle. When the kids told Mr. Conductor all about the partnership, he didn't think it was a good idea, and throughout the episode, he was right. Everything got worse at the lemonade stand ever since they made a deal with Schemer and Schemy. They watered down the lemonade, put pepper in the cookies, and raised their prices. When the three kids said that this is all unfair to the customers, Schemer unfairly accepted their resignations, leaving them jobless. Later, the three learns that they can make their own stand with lemons, pies, tarts, cookies, and more. And you know what? They became happy and successful because of it. Unfortunately for Schemer and Schemy, who had to deal with Midge Spoot and her sisters protesting around their lemonade stand with picket signs, and the moral of the story is, honesty is the best policy. So overall, this is a very good episode. My most favorite part was when they featured the two Thomas stories, Donald and Douglas, aka Breakvan in the UK, and the Deputation, because the Scottish twins are some of my favorite twins in the Thomas franchise. Not to mention that George Carlin did a really good job giving them Scottish accents in the US dub. Oh, and the overall message about honesty is executed really well. I highly recommend you watch this episode while drinking some lemonade and eating cookies at the same time. Number 7 is a tie between Double Trouble and Mr. Conductor's Evil Twin. The reason this is a two-way tie is because these are the only two episodes to feature Mr. Conductor's evil doppelganger. In Double Trouble, Dan draws a picture of Mr. Conductor, then some of Mr. Conductor's magic got onto the picture, bringing his evil twin to life. Unlike the real Mr. Conductor, who was good, his evil twin is mean, mischievous, and speaks entirely in rhyme, just like a Dr. Seuss character. Throughout the episode, he has been causing trouble, including ruining Stacy Jones's flowers and switching the signs to make up new names. By the way, the Fat Corners one was quite funny if you ask me. In addition to this episode, when the Jukebox Band sang This Train, they showcased some clips from the 1959 Czech animated film The Little Train, which is quite an interesting cartoon. Now in the sequel episode, Mr. Conductor's Evil Twin, Kara brings the character back to life because she needed more help cleaning. So she quickly grabs some of the real Mr. Conductor's gold dust and placed it onto the drawing. But it wasn't a good idea of hers to do, since Mr. Conductor's Evil Twin caused havoc around the station once again, including making the Jukebox Band sing a sad song called Danny Boy, which made Schemer cry, as well as impersonating Mr. King on the phone just to trick Stacy Jones and Billy Two Feathers into going to Leaky Park as soon as possible. After the Heroes episode, Kara tells the real Mr. Conductor the truth and apologizes for it. Then we have a final conflict between him and his evil twin. Then Kara pours some glue onto the fake Mr. C, and then he turns back into a lifeless drawing. Then Kara gives Mr. King the drawing, which made him happy. And Kara learns that everybody makes mistakes, and that we become better people when we learn from them, which is a great message in my opinion. Overall, Double Trouble from Season 2 and Mr. Conductor's Evil Twin from Season 3 were great episodes, not only because of the morals, but I thought Mr. C's evil twin is a pretty good antagonist. If I had an evil twin of my own, then his name would be Rovert, which is backwards for Trevor. Number 6, Schemer's Robot. This is the episode I remember seeing air on Fox Family when I was little. It is about Schemer introducing his robot that he bought to the people at Shinetime Station. Robbie the Robot, played by Michael Lamport, was originally purposed to do Schemer's bidding, but only for it to go out of control and starts falling in love with the jukebox. He even gave away Schemer's stuff for free to the tourists at Shinetime Station, much to Schemer's annoyance. In the end, when Barton Winslow arrives, Robbie then starts falling in love with his motorcycle, and as a result, Schemer gives the robot away to Barton. I don't know about you, but I like this episode. I thought the design for Robbie looked pretty cool, even though it's just a guy in a costume. It almost reminds me of Bender from Futurama in a way. I also thought it was kind of funny when he fell in love with the jukebox, then later fell in love with Barton Winslow's motorcycle at the end. Overall, Schemer's Robot is a pretty good and funny episode. And if you like robots in general, whether they are animatronic or costume, then this would probably be a great episode for you and your friends to watch. Number 5, Stacy Cleans Up. In this episode, a garbage train arrives at Shinetime Station. Rusty Rob McRail, the Scottish engineer of the train, and played by English-Canadian actor Michael Polly, was upset because no one wanted his garbage, not to mention that the dump was closed, so the gang made a plan on turning his garbage train into a recycling express, which was a very big help. When it comes to Stacy Jones episodes, this would be my favorite of the bunch because it teaches us, the audience, the importance of recycling things such as cans, bottles, and paper. And besides, I like to recycle because it helps the environment. And not only do I love the Thomas episode, James Goes Buzz Buzz, but I also liked the musical number from the Anything Tunnel known as If Anyone Did It a Little, which in my opinion was quite a fun song to listen to. Oh, and if the classic Thomas series had individual voice actors to begin with, just like the Japanese dub, then I think Michael Polly's Scottish impression would also fit quite well for the Scottish twins Donald and Douglas, particularly in the US dub. It's just a thought. In conclusion, Stacy Cleans Up is a very good episode because it teaches us how to recycle and why it's very important for the environment. And that's why it deserves the number 5 spot. I suggest you give it a watch. Number 4, Bully for Mr. Conductor. One day, Mr. King's nephew Buster arrives at the station giving Dan and Becky a hard time. Later, Mr. Conductor checks on Dan and teaches him how to handle bullies like Buster. First, he tells the story of Bulgy. Then he shows him a musical segment with public domain cartoons about handling bullies. Unfortunately, none of this seemed to work for Dan, but then Buster arrives and sees them. Dan then stands up for Mr. Conductor by telling Buster no and go away, basically. Then Buster gets caught by his uncle and gives him a consequence. After this, Mr. King thanks Dan and gives him Buster's ice cream cone as a reward. In conclusion, this episode is a perfect example of dealing with bullies done right because it teaches us how to handle them right. In fact, it has much better moral execution than Cool Cat Saves the Kids in terms of the subject matter. There are other good bully episodes from different shows too, but this is definitely one of my favorite Shine Time Station episodes because of these reasons alone. I suggest you give this an honest watch. Oh, and did you know that Buster returned in a Schemer Presents episode How to Share as a special guest star? Pretty cool, huh? I love the character dynamic between him and Schemy in that episode. Number 3 is Field Day. This is another season 2 episode of the show, and it's about Schemer getting some kids ready for a baseball game. One of my favorite parts of this episode was the song Everyone's a Winner, which showcases various public domain cartoons. I like this song because it shows that everyone is a winner in their own way. Not to mention that I once made fun of this song by singing, Everyone's a loser! Just kidding. Oh, and I also thought it was funny when Mr. Conductor was playing a game of checkers against himself, which reminds me of a Pixar short called Gary's Game, where an old man plays a game of chess against himself. In addition, I thought it was quite cool that Matthew Jones and Tanya Cupper return in this very episode. Yeah, we don't see them very often anymore. One last thing I want to mention is the jukebox band rendition of the song Take Me Out to the Ball Game, which I thought was quite catchy. There was a shortened edited version of the song in A Day in the Life, which is part of the Jukebox Band miniseries. In conclusion, Field Day was a pretty good episode with an overall great message about being a good sport. I suggest you give it an honest watch. Number 2. Schemers Alone. Also known as Schemer Alone on the VHS release, this is another Schemer episode where his mother had to go away for a while, much to Schemer's lonesomeness. So Schemer decides to be lazy and bring his own stuff into the station as his new bedroom, which was very immature if you ask me. Not to mention that he never actually paid anybody to the people who were helping him, including Barton Winslow, who drove to the station on his motorcycle to offer him some fast food. Instead, Schemer gives everybody IOUs on white pieces of paper, which makes him such a cheapskate. In the end, Schemer realizes that his mother was on his way. Midge Smoot already told his mother all about the situation, and Schemer learns to take responsibility from now on. Well, only for him to fall down the arcade steps with his stuff and shouts, Mommy! Which I thought was a hilarious way to end the episode. This is one of my favorite episodes starring Schemer, not just because of his character, but I also love the part where he made fun of the three little pigs, which Mitch Spoot had to read, especially when he says, Let the wolf eat bacon! Another one of my favorite parts is the I Can Do It musical segment where it showcases some babies doing activities all by themselves, which is kinda cute. But I can imagine if there was a baby animal version of this song, but with puppies, kittens, baby bunnies, etc. Now that would be cute as well. I especially thought the person did a great job with the song, named Beverly Glenn Copeland. So, all in all, Schemers Alone is a very funny and very good episode. It even has a great message about learning to take responsibility and being independent, even if your parents aren't around to help you. And that's why this episode deserves the number 2 spot. Before I get to the number 1 pick, here are some honorable mentions. Stacy Says No. I was going to include this episode on the list because it's putting your hoof down from MLP done right, but because Stacy was so assertive here, I decided to drop this episode from the list and to avoid backlash from certain fans. Is this the end? It would have been lower on the list because this is the final episode of season 1, and it takes place before the Christmas special "'Tis a Gift." It was also one of the final appearances of Ringo Starr as Mr. Conductor, so that's why I put it as an honorable mention instead. Billy's Party. Well, it was a good Thanksgiving Day episode, but the reason it didn't make it is because I didn't like the US dub of Thomas and Percy's Mountain Adventure because of the unnecessary re edits. But that's just me, though. Becky Makes a Wish. It would have been somewhere in the middle of this list. And my number one most favorite Shine Time Station episode of all time is Billy's Runaway Train. When it comes to episodes starring Tom Jackson as Billy Two Feathers, this is my favorite of the bunch. The reason this is number one is because I thought it was intense that Billy's diesel train was out of control and going too fast. So Stacy had no choice but to save Billy and his train by switching it onto another track, so that it wouldn't crash into another train that was parked by the station. And after the play was over and everyone took a bow, Billy phones in that his train is back in control and can proceed into Snarlyville without incident, which is a relief because I don't want anything bad happening to these characters. I also love the beginning part where everyone was rehearsing for the play about Casey Jones while its respective theme was playing in the background. By the way, I love that song despite the tragic backstory of the real Casey Jones. In addition, I thought it made perfect sense to add in the Thomas episode A Close Shave for Duck because that is also a runaway train story, and quite an intense one at that. So, all in all, Billy's Runaway Train is so intense and exciting that it deserves the number one spot. I'm so glad everything worked out in the end. Now, let me know in the comment section below on which of these Shine Time Station episodes are your favorite. Do you agree with my list, or do you have your own personal preference? This is Trevor Davis signing off and saying, Happy 35th anniversary to Shine Time Station. And no, I'm not going to do that Sparkle Sparkle meme from the Nostalgia Crate because it's not funny anymore. I'll see you all later.